Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Bruce McDonald, and this is the Telemanca Review. It's 10:55 p.m. and it's Monday, the 19th of January. Got another book up today. The Essential Alan Watt. Not the guy who talks about Zen and stuff like that. That's Alan Watts, the other Alan Watt. The one who podcasted for a number of years, and I think he died in 2022 shortly into COVID. Those COVID deaths are really piling up now too. They're keeping tabs on those things. And I put the book up. I got the EPUB done. I got the EPUB done for the Blackbird Talmud as well. That should be available any day now. And I've been going over these books, reading them on my iPad and familiarizing myself with these people: Jordan Maxwell, Alan Watt, um, the conspiracy theorist, and Bill Cooper. All three of them I've done books for. The Bill Cooper book is called William Cooper, the Reluctant Prophet. And that's the one I'm going to be reading from to start tonight's podcast. And it is very interesting. And, I don't know how Bill figured all this stuff out. It seems to me to reek of insider material. And that's the case with Alan Watt, by the way. He was a guitarist who played at private parties and, just in the Westchester mansions, just like the pianist in Eyes Wide Shut. It's uncanny how art mimicked life in that regard. And Alan Watt was a haunted man, probably drank himself to death. There's very few people who can come into contact with this truth at an experiential level, meaning that they can no longer tell themselves it might be. And that's how most of us engage this material, right? It's like a Mission Impossible movie, right? The Final Reckoning or Ghost Protocol or da-na-na. Oh, the world might be run by a multi-generational, multi-millennia continuation of ideas and sorcery by some form of being that looks like us but clearly is not us. And if you're curious about that idea, I highly recommend you read The Stolen Child, a work of fiction I wrote. But like I say, that book of fiction, literary fiction, it's very well written. That work of fiction is closer than anything I've written in nonfiction. Light of Darkness, Devil in Us, or uh, Stardust Ranch. So it's worth a read. Definitely worth a read, and you'll enjoy it. And reading is good for you. So don't be afraid of it. But I'm struck by the uncanny alignment between these three people: Jordan Maxwell, Alan Watt, and Bill Cooper, and what they were trying to tell the world, and how much I got right in The Stolen Child, which was an enterprise completely derived from imagination. But as I've said before on this podcast, about 2/3 of the way through the rewrite of the book, I met the author, or I met the muse, and this being was one of the more serious beings I've ever met in my life. He was pain embodied. That's all. That's the only description I'll give you. He was pain embodied. You know, way beyond anything that you've seen before. Like Pinhead in the Hellraiser movies. That's an example of embodying pain. But the being I met was pain embodied, and he was not human. Very similar to human, but not human. And so this is sort of put me into a little bit of funk, you know, thinking about these things and thinking about the fate of the world. And I also combine it with what the best teachers have told me. All right. And there's this uniformity in high spiritual teaching. And high spiritual teaching is given by somebody who's attained God realization. And so these are people like Jesus, like Milarepa, like Mahayama, like Yoganda, who was a yogi, but he went beyond the yogic system. And he was God conscious. Like he just called himself a yogi for the convenience of Indian culture. And they all stress the same thing. The great teachers. In your dealings in the world, be honest and direct, live morally, and fulfill all of your duties and obligations. Obligation to community if you run a small business, and obligation to your husband, your wife, your children, your parents. Fulfill your obligations. Be moral. Be good. And in the time that is given to us, once the chore of being human is finished, reserve as much of that time as possible for the pursuit of this total consciousness through any form, any number of internal arts, mantra, breathing, kriya breathing, meditation, prayer, fasting for purification of the body. And that's all pretty straightforward. But I've expressed this before on the Talamanca Review. I've said numerous times that I fail at this withdrawal from the world. And I jokingly say it's because I got a journalism degree, you know. But I don't think that's it. I think whatever was in me connected to the world and invested in the world existed before I went to journalism school. And so with all of the counsel I've received and everything I know through experience, I ask myself, why am I still concerned with the world? Because the final summation of the state of the world is that it's mostly bad, except for small pockets of time here and there, golden ages, if you will. But for the most part, this world is a slightly better option than hell. Now, if you don't understand what I'm saying, it's probably because you've never experienced anything beyond this world. You've never seen any of the other places in the other realms. They're beautiful. Asgard, rainbow bridges, crystal buildings, But do we really want that? And that's not a rhetorical question. The question is, do we as human beings really want that? Or are we addicted to the drama of being alive? I want you to think about your happiest moments in life, if you can recall them. They're difficult to recall. And the reason that they're difficult to recall is that moments of spiritual insight transcend normal memory. They operate at another level of consciousness, and they don't really get stored in the memory. You know, the memory is more event-based. So trying to remember a high state of consciousness, unless you revisit it on the daily, is difficult. It's akin to trying to remember the state of consciousness you lived in when you were 4 or 5 years old. Now, I know some of you listening to me now in your smugness think you can do that, but you're just fooling yourself. You can't really. Some of you, maybe. And those memories are gifted back to us in moments of spiritual insight, moments of childhood lucidity. I went through a phase up here in my first couple of years before um, Rosemary and I really settled in together, where I spent a tremendous amount of time alone. And at that time, I had no TV and I had no internet. You know, I could make a call on my cell phone if I stood at a certain spot on my property because the cell phone signal here is really bad, which is a good and bad at the same time. It's a blessing and a curse, I guess, is the way I would say it. And those were kind of magical times up here. There's something about solitude, real solitude, okay? Not 4 hours or 6 hours or 8 hours in front of a computer working and while you're working answering messages and stuff like that, but real solitude. Now think about the solitude I'm talking about here. I'm up in the rainforest. I have a few friends who visit once a week, every 2 weeks. This went on for a while. After we finished the house, the workers would come and visit, people who worked on the house. But I think everybody who came up to visit me sensed I wanted to be left alone. And I didn't do it in a rude way. It's just that the moment the house was built and I had created my fortress of solitude, to borrow Superman, I just wanted to be alone in a sense. And when my Costa Rican friends and brothers who helped build the house would come and visit me, I mean, they always want to party. They always want to smoke a joint or drink some liquor, and I don't do that, right? And when we were building the house together, I could hang out with people on a Friday night after the work week was done. I would usually buy a 2-4 of beer, and maybe would do a little cookout or something, have a barbecue and cook some meat, and they would drink the beer. And nobody really noticed that I wasn't drinking. But when you come up with a bottle of booze and hey, I'm going to visit my buddy Bruce, we're going to drink together, then it hit them, hey, yeah, this guy doesn't drink. I never saw him drinking. But in that time alone, I had all of these memories come back to me, and they were for the first time, meaning these were things I lived through, and some of them went back to like 3 years old. And honestly, for a spell, I thought I was going crazy. And then I realized because of all this solitude, I was regaining all of these memories from my childhood. And when you gain a memory from childhood, it's not a true memory, which is a reliving of the time. What strikes you most when you get these childhood memories is not the event, because the events of childhood are meaningless. You're playing in the backyard, you know? You're sitting on the floor watching TV. You're 3 years old. You're like this on the carpet looking up at the TV. The events are meaningless, really. It's not like your first kiss. It's not like going off to high school. They're meaningless. But recovering the memories are so precious, because in recovering the memory, you recover the consciousness of childhood. And then you remember how much you just knew about life as a child and how you could just be. And we spent our whole lives looking for that great being again, the supreme being, which is inside of us. The whole thing is a language riddle. You hear the word supreme being, you imagine Odin sitting on a throne in Valhalla or Asgard. You you imagine Yahweh presiding over the universe, the supreme being, you know, like Ayatollah Khomeini, the supreme leader. But the supreme being is us. It's us in our soul state. And we have it in childhood, and we don't realize what we have. We don't realize it. It's like that collection of poems by William Blake, From Innocence to Experience, right? So if you look at your life honestly, all of your great moments are moments of supreme being. When you break up with somebody that you loved and you wanted to stay with them, what do you think about? You think about these moments of being together. And in sharing life with that other person, you were in some measure able to regain that being. And the great teachers all teach us that what we're trying to do in life is regain ourselves, which is our pure being. And when we regain that, we realize almost simultaneously that that being is a part of the overall being of the universe, and that it's all connected, and we're connected to everything. And then when that happens, it doesn't matter where you are to be happy. It doesn't matter where you are. You'll be happy. It always amazes me when we talk about the past. You remember I went through that brief phase where I was talking about the Canadian podcaster Stefan Molyneux, who's really kind of a smug cunt, but he's got some good insights and some really polished language and expression. And he's very good with people who are delinquent. He, in a very good and forceful way, therapeutically gets them to confront the lie they're telling to themselves, which is an effective tool that philosophers have. They just never realize that philosophy is a lie and they're lying to themselves. Molyneux and his ilk, people like him, who are trying to decode reality. They all think they know something, and they don't. They're just grasping in the dark like the rest of us. And so are the physicists. So is Brett Weinstein. So are all these AI guys. They don't have a clue what's going on. And the reason they don't have a clue is the only way to understand things is to understand them spiritually. And spiritual understanding is always, always, always experiential. If you wanted to know what it was like to fight in a mixed martial arts fight, would you ask a commentator or somebody who's been in the ring? You'd ask the person who's been in the ring because experience is the knowledge. The first thing they teach you when you're studying journalism is a first-hand source is better than a second-hand source. But in life, there are no sources except God. And God is the supreme being. So why am I saying all these things tonight? Why am I yapping on, waxing poetic about all this nonsense? Because Cooper, Watt, and Maxwell made me think about these things. You do three. When I curate these books, I become deeply acquainted with the people in a way that is different than listening to them. Although I had never really listened to Alan Watt before, never heard of the guy, even though he was Canadian and he had gained quite a following in the podcasting world. Never heard of him. And yet, even with never hearing of these guys, I didn't know who these people were. I don't think I'd encountered Bill Cooper in any significant way. I hadn't listened to all his podcasts, The Hour of Our Time, or anything like that when I wrote The Stolen Child. Nor was I particularly well versed with Jordan Maxwell. I wrote The Stolen Child about 13 years ago, 14 years ago in, 2012. A long time ago. I wrote it here in Costa Rica. It was the first time I had a long stay in Costa Rica, 6 months. I was a tourist. I rented a little house down by the beach. I went swimming every day, and I wrote in the morning and I wrote in the evening. And that was a kind of heaven for me. Everyone in life gets a spiritual work. And if you find what your spiritual work is, not everybody does, or their spiritual work may not be related to how they make a living or want to make a living. It might be your work is on a factory floor, 25 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. You're working in a factory. You're working at a Ford plant, Chrysler, GM, Toyota. And that's not your spiritual work. Your real spiritual work is your family. And you cherish every moment you're with them and everything you do for them. Build a go-kart for your son, build a tree house, take your daughter figure skating. That's your spiritual work. The spiritual work I've been given in this life is self-development, and which is a form of work because the dividend is shared by people around me. Right? It's shared through frequency, it's shared through vibration, it's shared many ways. And then another chunk of work I was given was writing. And I call this my spiritual work because I attain a deep sense of being when I'm doing this work. And I can do this work for long periods of time and not get bored or tired. There's nothing I love more than to be 16 hours a day on a book. Doesn't mean I'm working all 16 hours, but I don't really leave it mentally, and I don't go too far away from a keyboard. I may stop writing for an hour or two and watch a movie in those 16 hours on my computer, the same place I do my writing. But that's just to forget what I'm writing about to come back at it fresh. And really, even when I'm watching the movie, the whole time the book's going on in the back of my head. Once you start a book, you can't escape it. I think you'd be cursed if you started a book and didn't finish it. And the closest I came was Stardust Ranch, but I finished it after a 7 year delay. And so the question before us is, where do you invest your energy? What's most important? Are these people really useful to us? Bill Cooper, Alan Watt, Jordan Maxwell, Bruce McDonald. Are they useful to us? What is the point of knowing that dark millennia old power structures control the world and human beings are cattle? What does it matter if you can attain your supreme being in this life and not have to reincarnate anymore? That means you get paroled from this school. I'm not saying to go along and work with them or anything like that. And I guess the answer for me is do everything and don't let the state of the world disturb your inner state. Your happiness is your happiness. If you can cultivate that happiness through spiritual pursuit, which is getting a closer relationship with your true being, well, you've earned that. Why shouldn't you allow yourself to be happy? And that happiness doesn't mean you get a big house or a BMW or, material prosperity, or the prosperity doctrine in some of the religions is nonsense. They're crazy, these people. Stop listening to them. All these Protestants and these crazy fucking people. The Jews. You're in God's favor. God will give you anything you want. Ask for $1 million. Why would you ask God for $1 million? God is your supreme being. Why would you disturb that state with a desire? Doesn't make any sense. Nobody questions this stuff. Nobody. Because we're stupid. We're a stupid race. We're stupid. We're those monkeys beside the monolith. So, with that introduction, I'm going to read a little bit of Bill Cooper because it's interesting. And I have a belief that this duality between the corrupt world and our desire to go back home spiritually. I think the corrupt world is almost over. That's what I saw when I wrote The Stolen Child. It's what I saw. And I think it's accurate, and I think I'm seeing it now. And I don't think we win the fight. I don't think it's a fight per se. I just think the way this thing works down here cyclically, um, things which occur, like this cult that runs the world, they have a death too, because everything born here dies. But I think that they've been able to control their reincarnations. I think they're kind of like the Tibetans, but on the power side, not on the liberation of humanity side. But I think their whole enterprise is coming to an end now. I think something epic is going on here. Now, what humanity does with that, I don't know. I don't know. Anyways, Okay. So let's read some Bill Cooper and then we'll discuss it, okay? And you'll see why these things are on my mind. The Cult of the All-Seeing Eye. And it's amazing where that all-seeing eye pops up, right? We get it in Tolkien. I don't know why, but women don't like Tolkien that much. So it's always the literati, you know, the literary elite who write for the New Yorker and the New York Times book reviews. I mean, back in the day, it's all shit now. Nobody cares about books. Everybody wants to read on some article on their iPhone or get a dopamine hit on TikTok. Nobody really reads anymore. But back when it mattered in the 80s, 90s, a little bit. Um, I don't know what I was going to say. I lost my mind there. Lost my train of thought. That's interesting. Um, hmm, yeah, Tolkien, the all-seeing eye. Yeah, Tolkien was always considered by the literati to be a adolescent literary endeavor. And it's amazing how many things that got characterized as juvenile when I was a young man, which over time have turned out to be extremely profound. This will not be across the board. We're not going to find out 50 years from now that, you know, we should have treated Stephen King like a literary genius and we didn't, because he isn't. But the comic books and Tolkien, that was really something, you know? When you think about all the life forms he created in Middle Earth, the orcs and all of these things, somehow his imagination was able to understand the history of the planet and he transformed it into his story. And our battle is against the all-seeing eye, which is the unmanifest, non-incorporated form of Sauron. And he can only incorporate when he has the ring. And then he can form corpus, form a body. It was amazing when you think about it, you know? I don't know if Tolkien knew everything, you know? He was another kind of Jordan Maxwell or Bill Cooper. In his learning, he probably stumbled across the same things. And his way of expressing it was through fantasy fiction, which is a very good way of expressing it because a good story will embed itself in the consciousness of the reader and stay with them their whole life. And then when they start to see aspects of the story manifesting in real life, they'll go, wow, I wonder what else he got right. And they'll go back and reread it and they'll go, holy shit, this is a blueprint. And fiction has a way of circumventing the auditing, circumventing the censorship. And there's censorship here all the time, highly censored. Anyways, let's get into this. The Cult of the All-Seeing Eye, the Root of the Tree. I have told you before, and I will tell you again, if you do not understand the religion of the enemy, you cannot understand the enemy. You can study their politics. You can study their economics. You can study their military strategies until you're blue in the face. But you'll only be looking at the shadows on the wall of the cave. You'll never see the fire that casts them. The New World Order is not just a political organization or a banking cartel. It is a spiritual movement. It is a religious crusade. And to the men who sit at the top of the pyramid, the men who pull the strings of the presidents and the prime ministers, this is a holy war. For 43 hours on the hour of the time, I broadcast a series called Mystery Babylon. It was the most important work of my life. It was the result of years of digging through dusty books, translating ancient texts, and infiltrating the secret societies that have guarded these truths for millennia. I did it because I realized that the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the Republic, all of it was being dismantled by men who answer to a higher authority than the electorate. They answer to the order. Now I'm going to stop there. I'm going to read more, but I'm going to stop there for a sec because I got something to say. Now, when you look at America, you look at its history, you look at all the people who've come from the four corners of the world to live in America, to leave their birth cultures. My family left Scotland, came over on a wooden boat. Chinese came over to build the railroad in San Francisco, in the West, settled in San Francisco. All the Europeans, Africans, Asians, Middle Easterners, Indians who came to America, and specifically America. Australia and Canada were close seconds, but specifically America. Why do you think that was? And I'm not going all jingoistic here. I'm not going all Steve Bannon or anything like that, but at the same time, I am. But the thinking man's version. Something a Steve Bannon or an Alex Jones could never articulate. America is an example of what human beings can do when they're left alone. And the American people and the American experience in its formative years was left alone. Now, this is not to say that the European bankers and these Illuminati forces were not part of it. They were from the beginning. All the founding fathers were Freemasons. So from the very beginning, they were a part of it. But they left the people alone, and they left the people alone because they wanted the country developed. And they knew the best way to develop the country was to allow people to own the equity they created. America demonstrated to the whole world that human beings are best when they're left alone and they're not overregulated. And the fear of death and starvation motivates them to wake up every day and make something of themselves. And there's no aristocracy to demotivate you, to come in and take half of your wealth, which would be taken. I mean, before governments took taxes, monarchies took physical commodities. If you were a grain farmer, the king's men would come by at harvest and say, half your harvest, please. It's very demotivating. Very demotivating. And that, for a brief period of time, maybe a century, that principle of demotivation was taken out of the American experience. And seeing what people did with it, seeing what people could do, and just intuitively, spiritually, the desire to be free and to create what you wanted to create in your life was the invisible magnetic gravitational force that drew people to the American experience. And in that freedom, they could cooperate, they could get things done. And in that freedom, we transcended a lot of things. Culture, religion, people work together. I mean, ultimately they did. There may have been friction in the beginning, Bill the Butcher and Gangs of New York. That's pretty much a true story, by the way. But then again, that wasn't taking place out in the open fields where people farmed. That was already in a densely populated city. New York was fairly well populated even in 1855. So this is one of the driving forces for Bill Cooper. Bill believed that the American experience was unique among nations. Many people believe it. The ET contactee Alex Collier talks about it a lot. How America was an opportunity. I believe it too. And I don't believe that opportunity is finished. It may be finished for Canada and Australia, but it's not finished for America. It never really began for Canada and America. That's the truth. No offense, Canadians. No, sorry, not America, Australia. No offense, Canadians. No offense, Australians. But it never really began in those countries. And I'm not saying America was a perfect place. You know, the gangs came about, the crime came about, and everything, but those were human problems you could deal with. But the tyranny of an aristocracy, the tyranny of landowners, the humiliation of serfdom, that was something everybody wanted to escape. The humiliation of the caste system in India, the starvation and humiliation of being a Chinese peasant. Get on a boat, go to a new world. And people did. And for the most part, America was fair. And the parts of it that weren't fair, nobody really cared about because they hadn't caught up with us yet. The banking system started in early formats, in early forms, it started even before the Federal Reserve, you know? But it didn't bother people that much or as much. So it was a testament, America was a testament to the human experience and the human spirit and what human beings really want. They want that self-ownership of their life. They want that freedom. That's why the cable car don't give up the way they live. That's why farmers don't want to give up their farms, even though it's brutally hard work, because it's them and the world. And it's a very important thing to understand. It's them and the world. And when you face the world as an individual consciousness, you grow spiritually. If you face the world through numerous filters of regulation and moderation, which is a normal day in Canada or California, it diminishes you spiritually. And it's meant to do that because the governing forces on this planet don't want the souls to leave. They don't. They don't want us to be free while we're here either. And so they work against it and they deliberately create policies that work against it. That's their job. Don't get angry with them. It's their job, you know? No need to get angry. That's their job. But it wasn't just a broadcast, it was an exorcism. Night after night, I sat in this chair surrounded by stacks of books. Morals and Dogma by Albert Pike, The Secret Teachings of All Ages by Manly P. Hall, The Golden Bough by James Fraser. And I read them to you. I didn't just summarize them, I read them verbatim. I wanted you to hear their own words, their own arrogance, their own plans for your enslavement. And the reaction was immediate and visceral. The phone lines lit up like a Christmas tree. People called me weeping. They called me in rage. They called me in shock. I had truck drivers telling me they had to pull over to the side of the road because they were shaking so hard they couldn't drive. I had housewives telling me they looked at the architecture of their churches and realized they were sitting in temples of the sun. By the way, this is Jordan Maxwell's main thesis as well. They all line up, by the way. And these guys didn't know each other. And this is not a psyop. It's not a psyop. Bill, they would say, I always knew something was wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on it. You just turned on the light. That series changed people. I didn't just inform them. It didn't just inform them, it transformed them. It took the fragmented pieces of the puzzle, the political corruption, the economic slavery, the endless wars, and assembled them into a coherent, terrifying picture. It showed them that these weren't isolated incidents of greed or incompetence. They were moves on a chessboard that has been in play for 6,000 years. We traced the lineage of the illuminated ones from the ziggurats of Sumer to the boardrooms of Wall Street. We followed the thread of the mystery schools through the Knights Templar, the Rosicrucians, and the Freemasons. We exposed the great work, the plan to unify the world under a single Luciferian authority. And let me tell you, the enemy noticed. The interference on the broadcast signal increased. The threats intensified. They knew that if the American people understood the religion of the elite would lose their power. Because their power depends on your ignorance. It depends on you believing that they are secular politicians, when in reality they are high priests of a very old, very dark faith. He's 100% right. To understand the root of this tree, you have to go back, way back. Before the United States, before Rome, before Greece. You have to go back to the cradle of civilization. You have to go back to Sumer, to Babylon, to Egypt. In the ancient world, knowledge was power, literal power. If you knew when the Nile would flood, you could tell the farmers when to plant. If you knew the movement of the stars, you could predict the seasons. If you knew the principles of geometry, you could build temples that awed the masses. This knowledge, the knowledge of science, of mathematics, of astronomy, of medicine, was hoarded. It was kept secret by a priest class who realized that if they shared it with the common man, they would lose their control. So they created a system. They created the mysteries. They split the population into two groups, the initiated and the profane. The initiated were the chosen few. They were the ones who were deemed worthy of the light. They were taught the secrets of the universe. They were taught that the gods of the public religion were just metaphors, allegories for natural forces and psychological states. The profane, that's you and me, folks, in their eyes, were the cattle, the mud people. We were considered too stupid, too emotional, too animalistic to handle the truth. So they gave us a religion of superstition. They gave us idols to worship. They gave us rituals to perform. They kept us in the dark while they walked in the light. At the heart of this ancient system was the worship of the sun. Not just the physical sun in the sky, although that was the exoteric symbol, but the spiritual sun, the light of intellect, the light of illumination. In Egypt, it was Osiris, the sun god, who was killed and resurrected. In Babylon, it was Baal. In Greece, it was Apollo. They're all the same entity. They are all representatives of the light bearer. This priesthood didn't disappear when Babylon fell. It didn't vanish when Egypt was conquered. It went underground. It became the invisible college. It passed its secrets from master to student, from generation to generation. preserving the ancient wisdom through the Dark Ages, waiting for the time when they could rebuild their new Atlantis. They believe that they are the guardians of the evolution of the human species. They believe that they have the divine right to rule over us because they possess the gnosis, the knowledge. And they believe that the end justifies the means. If they have to kill a few billion profane humans to save the planet and usher in their golden age, they'll do it without a moment's hesitation. This is the root of the tree. It is a tree that has borne poisoned fruit for thousands of years. And now that fruit is ripe. So I wanted to share a little Bill Cooper with you tonight. I might get back into it tomorrow. He's great to reference and to stimulate conversation. But at some point, I have to counsel. At some point, just listening to this stuff is dangerous. Okay? I know a lot of you that you like to listen to this material. It's interesting. It's titillating. It's salacious, cosmically salacious. But it means nothing if you don't do something with it. It means something, if nothing, if you don't use this information and alchemize it into a motivation to go deep within yourself to find the truth, because they can't hide the truth from you. They can hide knowledge, but all knowledge is inside us, right? And so the inner journey, as you define it, it might not be meditation for you, but I think meditation and stillness are the most effective things. Anyways, I'm going to call this the light of knowledge. I'm Bruce McDonald, and this has been the Talamanca Review.